What if I told you the US took control of an island, taking away its rights, culture and voice, while still benefiting from it today? When you're in Puerto Rico, you're not just in a vacation spot, you're in a part of the US. It feels like the US, but also feels different. This odd feeling didn't happen by chance. In fact, it's one of the best examples of how far the US went to keep control over land. In this video, I'll show you how the US held on to its colony in the Caribbean, using force, spying, and abusing the land and people. This is how the US stole Puerto Rico. The US takes control. In 1898, as the Spanish Empire weakened, the US stepped in, claiming to help independence movements. After winning the war, instead of freeing Spain's colonies, they took control, including Puerto Rico. On a quiet Tuesday, Puerto Rico was handed over from Spain to the US, starting a new chapter of US control. The US passed laws to take full control, appointing American leaders who knew little about Puerto Rico. Some leaders used the island for profit, like the one who built the massive domino sugar empire. At the same time, US banks gave out bad loans, took over land, and turned it into sugar farms. Puerto Rico became more dependent on sugar and goods from the US. When the US made new rules about shipping, prices for locals went up, and when they devalued the local money, Puerto Ricans lost almost half their wealth. To strengthen their control, the US banned Spanish in schools and public places. In a short time, the US turned Spain's old colony into a huge sugar farm, wiping out local culture, language, and identity while taking control of the people. Congress gives Puerto Ricans US citizenship just before a global war, sending Puerto Rican men to fight for the country that's exploiting their island. By 1922, Supreme Court decisions made Puerto Rico an unincorporated territory, meaning it was not fully part of the US. By the 1930s, big banks controlled most of Puerto Rico's sugar, tobacco farms, railroads, and shipping, while Puerto Ricans earned less than 4 cents an hour. Poverty spreads. The US also uses Puerto Rico as a key military base, testing bombs and leaving dangerous waste behind. By the middle of the 20th century, Puerto Rico had become exactly what the US wanted: a land focused on sugar production with low-paying jobs and a place for the US military to carry out important operations. The US, which once said it was freeing Puerto Rico from Spain, had now become its ruler, using the island for its own gain. But the people of Puerto Rico were getting fed up. They weren't going to accept this anymore. They were starting to fight back. The fight for freedom. Leading this fight is Pedro Albizu Campos, a remarkable figure. Born into poverty, he graduated as valedictorian from Harvard Law School, served in World War I, and even helped draft Ireland's independence constitution. A true superstar, Albizu Campos becomes a central figure in Puerto Rico's struggle for freedom. Ultimately, he returns to Puerto Rico to fight for independence but ends up in and out of prison for 25 years. The movement is just starting, and more Puerto Ricans join him, tired of being mistreated. They form the Nationalists, organizing, striking, and fighting back. The movement gains momentum, and things start to get serious. An American doctor, Cornelius Rhodes, comes to Puerto Rico claiming to do health research. But in a letter, he writes that Puerto Ricans are the dirtiest, laziest people, and admits he tried to harm them by killing and experimenting with cancer. This is horrifying, really horrifying. But for many Puerto Ricans, it wasn't surprising. The staff at the hospital finds this letter, sends it around, and it goes viral. And what happens to Rhodes? Nothing. Actually, something does happen. He lands on the front cover of Time magazine. To the Nationalists, this letter confirms something they already knew. It wasn't surprising. There was an awareness that America loved Puerto Rico for its soil, labor, and strategic location, but hated Puerto Ricans as a people. After this letter, the movement explodes. It reaches a point where the US government, along with its puppet administration on the island, can no longer ignore it. Soon, a slew of new officers are hired, trained, and armed with machine guns and tear gas. But the Nationalists keep fighting. Then, in 1935, police killed 4 Nationalists at a university event. the nationalists retaliate by killing the police chief. Without a trial, the police execute his killer and arrest Campos, the leader of the movement, for allegedly plotting to overthrow the government. Campos faces a rigged trial with a jury made up mostly of mainland Americans and is sentenced to 10 years in prison. A few months later, people are out peacefully protesting on Palm Sunday. The police start shooting into the crowd. Men, women, children, and elders are all clubbed, beaten to death, and shot in the back as they try to run away. 19 are killed and over 100 are wounded, but it still doesn't put down the movement. The violence only pours fuel on the fire. Rising tensions. In Washington, D.C., officials are worried Puerto Rico's independence movement is growing. They don't want to lose control of the island's resources and military bases, so they take extreme action. FBI agents work with local police to spy on nationalists and their families, collecting personal information, listening to calls, and watching them closely. Informants are used, often forcing people to turn on each other, causing broken relationships and communities. This operation, mostly done secretly, is all recorded in files called carpetas. The files contain highly detailed physical descriptions of the people they were tracking, including their occupation, the model of their car, their license plate number, and all of their moves and activities. It didn't stop there. They recorded who these individuals were supporting politically. Even those who moved away from Puerto Rico weren't exempt. They continued to track them, knowing exactly which apartment they lived in, for example, in the Bronx. They even speculated about these individuals' nationalistic tendencies. The documents show interviews with people close to the targets, revealing their personal beliefs. One person thought Puerto Rico's future was in socialism and independence, while another feared a friend had joined the independence movement. Informants always wanted the information kept secret. Agents also spoke with family members, including the mother of someone suspected of being involved. The documents focus a lot on who owned guns, showing how deeply the FBI was spying. They used this information to threaten, blackmail, and punish those suspected of supporting independence. There are thousands of examples: children kidnapped, people denied jobs, all because they had a file. This was psychological warfare, dividing the community and making them feel watched. This went on for decades, until nationalists felt they had no choice but to fight back. Revolution and repression. In 1950, they declared Puerto Rico an independent nation, tried to take towns, set fires, and even tried to kill the governor. But the US was too strong. Instead of getting attention, they were bombed. This was the only time the US bombed its own citizens. A survivor said it was a David versus Goliath fight, where they hoped to make the world notice Puerto Rico's struggle. During this revolution, many of the fighters wore their Sunday best, ironed suits and pressed ties, because they knew they would die. They had a cause they were fighting for. In the end, 24 were killed. Puerto Rico really didn't have a chance. President Truman came out and said there had been an incident in Puerto Rico, downplaying it. A couple of days later, 2 nationalists attempted to assassinate him. The world didn't come to Puerto Rico's rescue. Instead, the police carried out a mass arrest, throwing 3,000 people in jail. A few years later, 4 nationalists shot at the US Congress. Campos was arrested again and given an 80-year prison sentence. While in prison, he was exposed to harmful radiation, which caused a stroke, leaving him paralyzed and unable to speak. The US silenced him for good. Ongoing spying. After the revolution ended, the spying continued for decades. For 50 years, the US secretly watched the people of Puerto Rico, creating files on around 100,000 people. Many suspected it was happening, but they didn't know how widespread or detailed it was. In total, 1.8 million pages of documents were collected, and many of the victims are still alive today. The Carpenters shows how the US kept control over Puerto Rico, creating a system of oppression. The emotional toll on those affected and future generations is difficult to fully understand. Imagine such a pervasive force that was sowing division, mistrust, betrayal, and fear, not just of the government, but of each other. Puerto Rico never gained independence, and to this day, it remains an unincorporated territory. This means that they don't have the same rights as other American citizens, and the status of the island is a heated debate. Many Puerto Ricans value the modern-day benefits of being connected to the US, but at what cost? This is backlit by the US's lasting control over the island. Even though Puerto Ricans serve in the US military, they can't vote for president or fully participate in our democracy. But they still have a huge impact on American culture with their food, music, dance, and art. Most people don't think about Puerto Rico's status or history much. It's only during things like hurricanes, when the US response isn't as strong as for other places, that we remember Puerto Rico is still a colony, taken by war and controlled through exploitation and force. What we're left with is yet another example of a place whose vibrant spirit, culture, and people are somehow able to shine through the dark fog of colonial abuse that has left deep wounds on this island. So, looking at Puerto Rico's history, we can see that it's been a long fight for freedom and identity. Even with all the challenges, the people of Puerto Rico keep fighting for their rights. So, do you think Puerto Rico can ever be free from this control? What are your thoughts on their fight for independence? Share your opinion in the comments below. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this.